I just signed the papers that transferred the entire $500,000 into a trust my son will never touch. Not a single dollar. I know how that sounds. A father disowning his own flesh and blood. But before you cast your judgment, you need to understand the path that led me to this quiet, sterile office, with a pen in my hand that felt as heavy as a gravestone. This story didn't begin with anger. It began with grief, in the deafening silence of a home that had lost its heart. My wife, Eleanor. It began with a discovery she left for me, a secret legacy hidden inside her old cedar hope chest, a place that always smelled of her. It was a legacy I naively shared with our son Mark, only to see his grief curdle into pure, unadulterated greed right before my eyes. He saw the money, and he no longer saw his father. He saw an obstacle. If you want to hear how a son's betrayal forced a father to choose between his child and his wife's final dream, then stay with me. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions about this story in the comments. You'll want to hear how this ends. Before that pen hit the paper, before the lawyers and the cold, hard numbers, my life was measured in different terms. It was measured in the slow, golden light of the afternoon that filtered through the living room window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was measured in the familiar creak of the third step on the staircase, a sound so ingrained in my memory that its absence would have been more alarming than a fire alarm. For 42 years, this house wasn't just a structure of wood and nails. It was a living, breathing archive of a life shared with Eleanor. After she was gone, the silence was the loudest thing in it. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every other sound. My days fell into a quiet, unyielding routine. I'd wake at 6 a.m., just as I always had, and for a split second, I'd expect to smell coffee already brewing. But the kitchen would be still, the air cool and empty. I'd make the coffee myself, using the same old percolator we bought at a flea market in 1987. I'd sit in my worn brown leather armchair by the window, the one with the permanent imprint of my shoulders, and watch the world wake up. That chair was my command center. From it, I had watched our son Mark take his first steps on the lawn, seen him off to his first day of school, and waved goodbye as he drove off to college. Eleanor used to say that chair had seen more of our life than we had. She'd sit on the ottoman, her feet tucked beneath her, and we'd talk for hours. Now the ottoman was empty. The house was filled with her. Her scent, a faint mix of lavender and the lemon oil she used on the furniture, still clung to the air in the upstairs hallway. Her gardening gloves sat on the back porch table, caked with the soil of the last rose bushes she'd planted. On the mantelpiece, a photo from our 25th anniversary showed her laughing, her eyes crinkling at the corners in that way they always did when she was truly happy. I'd find myself talking to that photo, telling her about my day, about the leaky faucet I'd finally fixed, about the odd-looking bird that had landed on the feeder. It was a one-sided conversation, but it was the only one that felt real. Mark's visits on Sundays were the only regular interruption to my solitude. He'd arrive at precisely 11 a.m., carrying a bag of groceries filled with things he thought I should be eating: kale, quinoa, almond milk. He'd sit on the stiff, formal sofa Eleanor had called the guest couch, never in his mother's favorite spot. Our conversations were stilted, circling around safe, impersonal topics. He'd talk about his job, about a new app he was investing in, about the rising property values in his neighborhood. His eyes would scan our living room, not with the warmth of nostalgia, but with a cool, detached assessment. He'd point out the peeling paint on the window frame, or mention that our old furnace was probably inefficient. "You know, Dad," he'd say, "a modern heat pump could save you 30% on your utility bills." I'd just nod. His world was one of quarterly reports and asset allocation, a language I understood but didn't speak. My world was the faint scent of Eleanor's life still clinging to the curtains. The heart of our home, for me, had always been Eleanor's cedar hope chest. It sat at the foot of our bed, a solid, dark piece of wood that her father had made for her when she was 16. It smelled of promises and history. Inside, she kept the artifacts of our family. My bronze star from the war, Mark's first baby shoes, the dried corsage from my high school prom, and bundles of letters tied with faded silk ribbons. I remember the day she first placed her grandmother's lace wedding veil inside. Her hands moved with a reverence, as if she were handling something sacred. "This chest holds our story, Frank. she'd told me, her voice soft. It's everything we were, and everything we hoped to be. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt like closing a book I wasn't ready to finish. The polished wood was cool and smooth under my fingertips, a silent testament to the life we had built, a life that I thought was our only legacy. It was just sitting there, waiting, holding a story I thought I already knew by heart. The Sunday after I told him, the air in the house shifted. It was subtle at first, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Mark arrived not at 11 a.m. with a bag of organic vegetables, but at 10:45, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that looked alien on our worn floral sofa. He didn't ask about the leaky faucet or the squirrels raiding the bird feeder. He set the briefcase down, clicked open the brass latches with a sharp snap, and laid out a series of glossy brochures on the coffee table. The names on them were a blur of words like Vanguard, Fidelity, and Wealth Management. The smell of fresh ink and expensive paper filled the space between us, overpowering the familiar scent of lemon oil and old books. "Dad, I did some preliminary research," he began, his voice taking on a new tone. It was the voice he used for business calls, crisp and efficient, stripped of any familial warmth. "We can't have $500,000 in cash sitting around. It's not just unsafe, it's financially irresponsible. It's losing value to inflation every single day." He tapped a chart showing a steep upward curve. With a properly diversified portfolio, we could be looking at a 7% annual return. That's $35,000 in the first year alone. Passive income. I looked from his eager face to the photo of Eleanor on the mantel. Passive income. The words felt like a foreign language. The money wasn't an asset to be managed. It was the sum of 1,000 small sacrifices Eleanor had made. It was the vacations we never took, the new car she insisted we didn't need, the countless times she'd patched our clothes instead of buying new ones. It was her quiet, stubborn love, converted into paper. "Mark," I said slowly, my hand resting on the arm of my leather chair, its cracked surface a familiar comfort. "Your mother, she wasn't saving for a portfolio, she was saving for us. For a trip, maybe, to finally see the sequoias." Mark let out a short, impatient sigh. "Dad, be realistic. This is more than trip money. This is legacy money. This secures our family's future." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on me. "We need to get this into an account immediately. A joint account, so I can help you manage it. You shouldn't have to deal with the stress of all this." The word stress hung in the air, a polite substitute for what he really meant. That I was too old, too simple, too out of my depth to handle it myself. It was the first time he had ever made me feel like a burden. I didn't answer, just stared at the brochures covering the spot where Eleanor used to rest her teacup. The phone calls started the next day. The first was at 9:15 a.m. on Monday. "Morning, Dad. Just wanted to see if you'd had a chance to look over those pamphlets." Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. "Hey, I spoke with a guy at Merrill Lynch, a friend of a friend. He can meet with us on Thursday." I tentatively booked a slot for 2 p.m. Wednesday. He called twice. His tone grew tighter with each call, the feigned concern fraying at the edges, revealing a raw impatience. I'd sit in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear, and look at the cedar chest. It remained at the foot of my bed, solid and silent. It felt like Eleanor's last line of defense, a silent guardian of her dream. Mark never mentioned the chest. To him, the money had been magically born the moment I found it. Its origin, its history, was irrelevant. That Friday, he showed up unannounced. He had his wife, Sarah, with him. She gave me a hug that felt brittle and quick, her eyes scanning the room. "Frank, this is wonderful news," she said, her smile a little too bright. "Mark told me everything. We were thinking, with a little nest egg like this, you could finally fix up this place. A new kitchen, maybe? Or we could all take that cruise to Alaska you and Eleanor always talked about." Her words were meant to sound kind, but they landed like stones. They were already spending it. In their minds, the money was no longer locked in a chest. It was funding renovations and booking vacations. It had been absorbed into their balance sheet. The money stays here for now, I said, my voice firmer than I intended. I need to think. Mark exchanged a look with Sarah, a quick, almost imperceptible glance of shared frustration. Dad, what is there to think about? He said, his voice laced with an exasperation he barely tried to hide. It's common sense. You're being sentimental. We're trying to help you. He gestured around the living room, at the faded wallpaper and the worn rug. Mom would have wanted you to be comfortable. She wouldn't want you sitting here while her life savings rots in a box. The way he said rots in a box made my stomach clench. He was talking about her hope chest. He was talking about her story. And in that moment, looking at my son's handsome, impatient face, I felt a deep, cold fissure crack open between us. It was a crack I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we would never be able to repair. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, cold snap, like a branch breaking under the weight of too much ice. It happened on a Thursday evening, 1 week after I'd found the money. The day had been gray and damp, and a persistent drizzle tapped against the window panes, a rhythm that matched the anxious thrumming in my chest. Mark had been relentless. 7 calls in 5 days. Each one a little less patient, a little more demanding. He arrived that evening, just as I was clearing the table for my solitary dinner, the plates still warm. He didn't bring groceries. He brought a single crisp manila folder and an air of finality. He laid the folder on the kitchen table, right next to my half-empty glass of water. Dad, I've had it, he said, not with anger but with the weary tone of a parent dealing with a stubborn child. I spoke to an estate planner. He drew this up. It's a simple living trust. We put the $500,000 in it, and I'll be the trustee. It protects the money, it ensures it grows, and it makes sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign. He slid a document out of the folder. My name was already typed at the bottom, next to a neat black line. He was the trustee. He would have total control. I looked at the paper, then at him. Mark, I said, my voice quiet. This was your mother's. It wasn't for an estate plan. It was for us. The word felt hollow even as I said it. The us I was referring to, the one with Eleanor, was gone. He scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. Dad, stop. Mom's gone. We have to be practical now. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of profound irritation. I just don't get you. This is a gift. A lottery ticket. And you're treating it like it's some sacred relic from a tomb. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression softening for a fraction of a second as he saw it was Sarah. Look, I have to take this. Just read the document. It's for your own good. He walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, leaving the trust agreement sitting on the table like an ultimatum. I didn't move. I just stood there, my hand resting on the back of a chair, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. I could hear his voice from the hall, low and urgent. He must have thought I'd gone upstairs, or that the sound of the rain would cover his words. But in the silence of that house, his voice carried, sharp and clear. No, he's still being difficult, he murmured. A pause. I know, it's like talking to a brick wall. Another pause, longer this time. Then his voice dropped even lower, laced with a venom that made the air in my kitchen feel 20 degrees colder. Listen, Sarah, he's just sitting on it. He's old, he'll just fritter it away on God knows what. It's practically our inheritance already, we're just securing it early. The words hit me with a physical force. Inheritance. He was already treating me like I was dead. He wasn't trying to protect me, he was protecting his investment. He wasn't my son, worried about his father. He was a vulture, circling, impatient for the end. The grief that had clouded my mind for 6 months didn't just burn away. It was flash-frozen into a sheet of pure, clear ice. I felt a profound calm settle over me, a stillness so deep it was almost peaceful. The sadness was gone. In its place was a hard, cold certainty. I heard the click of his phone as he ended the call. A moment later he walked back into the kitchen, his face rearranged into a mask of patient concern. Sorry about that, he said, his eyes avoiding mine. So have you had a chance to look it over? I picked up the document from the table. My hand didn't shake. I looked at the line where my signature was supposed to go. Then I looked directly at him. For the first time, I saw him not as the little boy whose hand I used to hold, but as the stranger standing in my kitchen. You know what, Mark? I said. my voice even and steady. "You're right. It's time to be practical." A slow smile of relief spread across his face. Triumph. He thought he had won. "Great, Dad. I knew you'd see reason." "Let's go to the bank on Monday," I continued, folding the useless document and setting it aside. "We'll deposit the money together, into a new account." He practically beamed, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "Absolutely. 9 a.m.? I'll pick you up." He came over and put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that now felt like a violation. "This is the right move, Dad. You'll see. Mom would be proud." He didn't know that as he spoke, my eyes were fixed on the doorway leading to the bedroom, where Eleanor's cedar chest sat. She would not be proud. But I knew exactly what she would want me to do next. My son thought he was managing a confused old man. He was about to find out he was dealing with Eleanor's husband. As the front door clicked shut, the sound echoed in the sudden, vast silence of the house. Mark was gone, and he had taken the last of my son with him, leaving behind a stranger's smug satisfaction. I stood there in the kitchen, the trust document he'd left behind feeling like a piece of garbage in my hand. I walked over to the trash can and dropped it in, the paper landing softly on a bed of coffee grounds. I didn't feel rage. The heat of that emotion had burned out the moment I heard his voice in the hallway. What was left was a quiet, chilling clarity. It was as if I had been walking through a thick fog for 6 months, and a harsh wind had suddenly blown it all away, revealing the stark, treacherous landscape around me. I walked into the living room and sat down in my leather armchair. The rain had stopped, and the streetlights cast long, watery reflections on the wet pavement outside. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I felt a profound, almost unnerving calm. Mark saw an old man, a relic to be managed. He heard my stories about Eleanor and dismissed them as sentimentality. He saw her life's savings not as a testament of her love, but as a line item on a future balance sheet. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten who I was before I was his father. He had forgotten I was the man Eleanor had chosen, the man who had built this life with her, nail by nail, dollar by dollar. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, to the photograph of Eleanor. Her eyes seemed to find mine across the quiet room. She had been a gentle woman, but she was never weak. She had managed our household finances with the precision of a surgeon for 42 years. She had built this secret fortune with patience and discipline that Mark, with his get-rich-quick schemes and talk of passive income, could never comprehend. She had done it for us, for our future, and he was trying to steal that future. A slow, cold resolve hardened within me. There would be no yelling, no emotional confrontation. That was his arena, a place of messy, chaotic feelings he could twist and manipulate. My response would be like Eleanor's savings plan, quiet, methodical, and executed with absolute precision over time. He would not see it coming. He was so blinded by the number, $500,000, that he couldn't see the man who was still sitting in this chair. I leaned back, the old leather creaking a familiar sigh. I closed my eyes and began to formulate a plan, step by logical step. It would be a legal, ethical, and utterly devastating lesson. He wanted his inheritance early. Fine. I would make sure he received exactly what he deserved, nothing more and a whole lot less than he was expecting. The alarm went off at 6 a.m. on Monday, October 23rd, just as it always did. But this morning, the familiar routine felt different, sharper. I didn't linger in my armchair with my coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen counter, my eyes fixed on the phone. It rang at precisely 8:15 a.m. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice intentionally calm, a little tired. "Morning, son." His voice was tight with excitement. "Morning, Dad. You ready? I can be there in 20 minutes to pick you up for the bank." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Actually, Mark, there's been a slight change of plans. I found some old tax documents in the chest with the money. I need to get things in order before I make any large deposits. Don't want to raise any red flags, you know?" There was a beat of frustrated silence on the other end. "Red flags? Dad, it's not illegal. It's a gift." "All the same," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument, "I want to do this by the book. I'll be tied up with it for most of the day. I'll call you when I'm done." I hung up before he could protest further. The first lie was the easiest. It was also the last one I would need. Instead of going to our local bank, I drove 45 minutes into the city, to a branch of a national bank where no one knew my name. I carried the money in a plain canvas duffel bag that I'd once used for fishing trips. The bag felt impossibly heavy. The bank was a cavern of marble and hushed efficiency. A young woman in a crisp suit led me to a private office after I explained the size of the deposit. She was professional, but her eyes widened slightly when I unzipped the bag and began stacking the neatly wrapped bundles of cash on her desk. The process took over an hour. I had to fill out a currency transaction report, Form 8300, detailing the source of the funds. I wrote, "Personal savings from deceased spouse," in the box. There was no lie in that. By 11:30 a.m., the $500,000 was no longer a secret hoard in a cedar chest. It was an electronic number in a newly opened high-yield savings account number 7458821, under my name and my name alone. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter, as if I had just shed a skin. My next appointment was at 1 p.m. at the law offices of Abernathy & Sons, a firm I'd found through my old military service network. Their office wasn't in a new glass tower, but in a historic brick building with floors that creaked with history and integrity. The air smelled of old paper, wood polish, and strong coffee. Mr. Abernathy was a man in his late 60s, with a firm handshake and eyes that saw everything. He didn't interrupt as I laid out the story, my voice even, and factual. I told him about Eleanor, about the chest, about the money. I told him about Mark's impatience, and I told him about the phone call I had overheard. When I finished, I slid Eleanor's note across his polished mahogany desk. He picked it up gently, reading the words, "For our next chapter, my love." He looked at me, not with pity, but with a quiet, profound understanding. "So, Frank," he said, his voice a low rumble, "what is it you want to do?" "I want to honor my wife," I said. "And I want to teach my son the value of a legacy he believes can be cashed in like a stock certificate." Mr. Abernathy laid out the strategy with the precision of a general planning a campaign. It was not about revenge, it was about preservation. The instrument would be an irrevocable trust. Once you place the assets in this trust, Frank, they are no longer yours. They belong to the trust itself, he explained, his pen tapping on a legal pad. You can be the manager, but you cannot be the beneficiary. And most importantly, it cannot be challenged or changed by anyone. Not even you. This was exactly what I wanted. A fortress. He asked who the beneficiary would be. An idea, born from the memory of Eleanor's pride in her father's craftsmanship, had already taken root. "I want to establish a scholarship," I said. "We'll call it the Eleanor Vance Artisan Scholarship. It will provide a full grant of $25,000 each year to a young person studying traditional woodworking or furniture making. The principal will be invested conservatively to ensure the fund lasts for generations." Mr. Abernathy's lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Poetic," he said, "and ironclad." He quoted me his fee, a $5,000 retainer, to be drawn from the new account, and a flat fee of $15,000 to finalize the trust and its administration. I signed the client engagement letter, document 1138C, without hesitation. He promised all the necessary paperwork would be drawn up and ready to sign within 2 weeks. By November 10th, he assured me, your wife's legacy will be secure. The phone calls from Mark continued, each one more strained than the last. On Friday, his voice was sharp, cutting. "Dad, what is going on? I spoke to my guy at Merrill Lynch, and he said the market just jumped 2%. We're losing money by waiting." I was watering Eleanor's roses on the back porch, the cool evening air a balm. "Mark," I said calmly, turning the nozzle to a fine mist. "Everything is being handled. I'm making sure it's all done correctly. Patience is a virtue." "This isn't about virtue, it's about math," he shot back. "I just don't understand what you're doing." "You will," I said softly and ended the call. He didn't need to understand, he just needed to wait. Every action I took was deliberate, legal, and quiet. I was moving assets, signing papers, and building a wall around Eleanor's dream, brick by legal brick. Mark thought he was waiting for a deposit. He had no idea he was actually waiting for a judgment. That night, for the first time in months, I opened the cedar hope chest. The familiar scent of wood and memories filled the room. It was empty now. The false bottom pried up, the hollow space exposed. It no longer held a secret fortune, but it wasn't truly empty. It held a promise that was finally being kept. I ran my hand over the smooth, dark wood, the same wood her father had shaped with his own hands. The money was gone, but its purpose was clearer than ever. I wasn't just protecting a sum of cash. I was protecting the story of every sacrifice, every quiet act of love that had filled this chest over a lifetime. I was writing the next chapter Eleanor had wanted. And in this chapter, there was justice. There was peace. And there was a hard lesson on the horizon, coming from my son like the slow, inevitable turn of a season. The 2 weeks that followed felt like living in two separate worlds. In one, I was the grieving widower, moving slowly through the quiet rooms of my house, answering the phone with a weary voice. In the other, I was a field commander, executing a silent, meticulous campaign. My days took on a new, secret rhythm. I'd spend hours in my small study, the one Eleanor used for her sewing, surrounded by papers. I wasn't just waiting, I was preparing. I researched the top 3 vocational schools in the state with woodworking programs, printing out their curriculum and financial aid requirements. I made calls to old friends, men I trusted, asking for recommendations for a small, independent investment firm that specialized in managing nonprofit endowments. I was building the infrastructure for Eleanor's legacy. Mark's calls were the daily intrusions from that other, louder world. He'd check in every morning, his voice a tight coil of feigned concern and raw impatience. "How's the tax stuff coming, Dad?" he'd ask on Monday. "Did you find out what you needed?" "It's more complicated than I thought," I'd reply, looking at a brochure for the North Bennett Street School in Boston. "These old files are a mess. I might need to talk to an accountant." On Wednesday, his tone sharpened. "An accountant? Dad, you don't need an accountant for a cash gift. They're just going to charge you a fortune for nothing. We are losing money. The market is climbing, and we are sitting on the sidelines. It's like leaving a winning racehorse in the stable." I could hear the frustration vibrating through the phone. He was a man watching a prize slip through his fingers, and he couldn't understand why I wasn't sprinting to hand it to him. "It will get done, Mark," I'd say, my voice a placid lake he couldn't ripple. "When it's done right." On the 1st of November, a week before the trust was to be finalized, he showed up unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was polishing the cedar chest with Eleanor's lemon oil, the scent filling the bedroom. The doorbell rang with an insistent, stabbing chime. When I opened the door, he was standing there, his face a mask of strained patience. He wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside him, clutching a large, leather-bound planner. "We were in the neighborhood," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We thought we'd see if you needed a hand with all that paperwork." They followed me into the living room, their presence sucking the quiet comfort out of the air. Mark didn't sit down. He paced in front of the fireplace, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Dad, this has gone on long enough. I don't understand the secrecy. I'm your son. I'm just trying to help you make the smart move here." "The smart move is the careful move," I said, settling into my armchair. It felt like my throne, the only place in the house where I still had absolute authority. Sarah sat on the edge of the guest couch, opening her planner. "Frank, we took the liberty of scheduling a meeting with our financial planner, David, for this Friday. He manages a $200 million portfolio. He can get this sorted out in an afternoon." She was trying the gentle, organized approach, the one meant to handle a confused elderly relative. I looked from her bright, false smile to my son's tense jaw. "That won't be necessary," I said. Mark stopped pacing. "Why not?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What are you doing?" "I'm handling my wife's affairs," I said, my voice dropping, becoming as hard and dense as old oak. and I will do it in my own time and in my own way." The look that passed between him and his wife was one of pure, unadulterated frustration. They saw a stubborn old fool. They had no idea they were looking at a judge who had already passed sentence. On Thursday, November 9th, I drove back to Mr. Abernathy's office. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind of autumn day Eleanor had loved. The office was just as I remembered, quiet, solid, smelling of history. Mr. Abernathy greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into a conference room where a stack of documents sat in the center of a long, polished table. "It's all here, Frank," he said, gesturing to the pile. The top document read, "The Eleanor Vance Artisan Scholarship Trust, irrevocable." I spent the next hour reading every single word. My name was listed as the sole trustee, with the power to appoint a successor board upon my death or incapacitation. The beneficiary was clearly defined. One deserving student annually, enrolled in a certified program of traditional woodworking, joinery, or furniture craftsmanship. The payout was set at $25,000 per year, adjusted for inflation every 5 years. The principal was to be invested in a low-risk fund, with a target return of 5 to 6% annually, ensuring the trust would not only survive but grow for generations. It was perfect. It was a fortress. At 2:47 p.m., I picked up a heavy black fountain pen and signed my name on the final page, Document TV 4591B. My signature wasn't shaky. It was the firmest it had been in years. The final step was the most crucial. The next morning, Friday, November 10th, I met Mr. Abernathy's paralegal at the Citibank. We were shown into the same private office as before. I presented the signed and notarized trust documents to the bank manager, a Mr. Evans. He reviewed them carefully, nodding. I then signed the authorization for a wire transfer. I watched as he typed the instructions into his computer. At 10:15 a.m., a single transaction moved $480,000 from my personal savings account, number 7458821, to the newly established brokerage account for the Eleanor Vance Artisan Scholarship Trust, account number 880-21157 at Charles Schwab. The remaining $20,000 was transferred to Mr. Abernathy's firm to cover all legal and administrative fees. When it was done, my personal account held a balance of $317.42. The money was gone. It was safe. It was finally doing the work Eleanor had intended for it. That evening, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I took my notarized copy of the trust agreement, a thick sheaf of paper bound in a blue legal cover, and walked upstairs. I opened the cedar hope chest. The vast, empty space where the money had been no longer looked like a void. It looked like a beginning. I placed the trust documents inside, right on top of the faded silk ribbons and Mark's first baby shoes. Then, I took out Eleanor's original note, "For our next chapter, my love," and placed it on top of the legal papers. I closed the lid gently. The story was finally complete. The chest was no longer a bank vault, it was a time capsule. It held the truth of our past, and the blueprint for a future she had dreamed of, a future that would now touch the lives of strangers, of young artisans, who would create beautiful things with their hands, just as her father had. I let a full day pass. On Saturday I worked in the garden, trimming back Eleanor's roses for the winter. The cold air felt clean in my lungs. I felt no anger, no bitterness. Only a quiet, resolute sense of purpose. On Sunday morning, I sat in my leather armchair, the house silent around me, and I waited. At precisely 10 a.m., I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with anxiety. "Dad?" "Mark," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm ready. Everything is in order now. Come over at noon. It's time we settled this." I heard him let out a long, slow breath on the other end of the line, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "I'll be there, Dad," he said, his voice suddenly warm, friendly, victorious. "I'll be right there." I hung up the phone and looked at the empty ottoman where Eleanor used to sit. The trap was set, the student was on his way, and class was about to begin. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed noon, each deep, resonant gong sounding like a gavel falling in a silent courtroom. I heard Mark's car pull into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel too fast, too eager. A moment later, the front door opened. He didn't knock. Dad? I'm here, he called out, his voice booming with a false cheerfulness that didn't belong in this quiet house. He walked into the living room, a leather satchel slung over his shoulder, a wide, predatory smile plastered on his face. He was dressed in a crisp polo shirt and slacks, looking more like he was heading to a golf club to close a deal than visiting his father. Ready to go? The bank closes at 3 today, so we should get a move on. I remained seated in my leather armchair, a half-empty mug of lukewarm coffee resting on the small table beside me. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the worn fabric of the chair and the dust motes dancing in the air. I didn't get up. I simply looked at him, my hands resting on the cracked leather arms. We're not going anywhere, Mark. His smile faltered, just for a second, a tiny crack in the facade. What? What do you mean? You said it was time to settle this. He took a step closer, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a hidden camera. A prank. Is this a joke? Because it's not funny. I canceled a meeting for this. It's no joke, I said, my voice as calm and steady as the old clock's ticking. I meant what I said. Everything has been settled. The color drained from his face, replaced by a blotchy red flush of confusion and anger. He dropped his satchel onto the guest couch with a heavy thud. Settled how? What did you do? He started pacing, a caged animal in my quiet living room. Did you talk to someone? That accountant you mentioned? Dad? I told you not to do that. They take advantage of people like you. They see a big number and their eyes turn into dollar signs. How much did he charge you? We can fight it. His words were a rapid-fire assault, each question an accusation. He wasn't worried I'd been taken advantage of. He was terrified someone else had gotten to his money first. No one took advantage of me, son, I said, my gaze unwavering. I made a series of decisions. Carefully, methodically, I did exactly what needed to be done. He stopped pacing and spun to face me, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The mask of the concerned son was gone, melted away by the heat of his panic. All that was left was the raw, ugly greed I had heard in his voice on the phone. What decisions? What are you talking about? It's $500,000, Dad. You don't just make decisions with that kind of money without consulting anyone. Without consulting... He took another step forward, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. Where is the money? I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was cold now and bitter. The money, I said, placing the mug back on its coaster with a soft click, is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's safe. That was the word that broke him. Safe from what? He practically shouted, his voice cracking. Safe from me? Is that what this is? You think I was trying to steal from you? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that scraped the air. I was trying to help you. I was trying to build something for our family, to turn Mom's little nest egg into a real legacy. I had plans, Dad. Sarah and we were going to use the returns to put a down payment on a bigger house, one with a yard for the kids we want to have. A house you could have come to live in. We were securing our future. He finally said it. His future, not mine. His inheritance, secured early. He was no longer even pretending. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him. At this stranger standing where my son used to stand, his face contorted with a sense of righteous indignation. He felt entitled to Eleanor's sacrifice. He believed her hard-earned dream was his for the taking. Your mother's legacy was never about a bigger house for you, Mark, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 42 years of truth. It was about something else entirely. He threw his hands up in the air, a gesture of complete exasperation. Oh, here we go again with the sentimental nonsense. It's money, Dad. It's a tool. And you've done something stupid with it, haven't you? You gave it away? You put it in some low-yield bond that won't even keep up with inflation? He leaned in, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with anger. You tell me what you did. You tell me right now. I leaned back, the old leather creaking in protest. My fingers traced the outline of a tear in the armrest, a tear that had been there since Mark was a boy, roughhousing with the dog. There's nothing to tell, Mark, I said, my voice soft, final, because there's nothing left for you. The money is gone. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock, each second a hammer blow against the silence. Mark just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The words, "The money is gone," seemed to hang in the air between us, shimmering and unreal. Then, his face contorted into a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. He took a step back, as if the very air around me was toxic. "Gone where?" he spat, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "What did you do? Did you get scammed? Did some telemarketer convince you to send it to a Nigerian prince? My God, I knew this would happen. I knew you couldn't handle it." He started pacing again, his hands raking through his hair. "We can fix this. We'll call the police, we'll report it as elder fraud, we'll get it back. Just tell me who you gave it to." He was building a narrative, a story where I was the victim, the confused old man who had been duped. A story where he could still be the hero, the savior who would swoop in and recover his inheritance. I let him talk, let him spin his frantic tale. I remained perfectly still in my armchair, the worn leather a silent anchor in his storm. When his frantic energy finally began to wane, leaving him panting slightly in front of the cold fireplace, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his panic like a razor. "No one scammed me, Mark. No one took anything. I knew exactly what I was doing, every step of the way." His eyes narrowed, the last of his manufactured concern evaporating. "Then where is it?" he demanded. "Show me the bank statements. Show me where the money is." I slowly pushed myself up from the chair. My joints ached, but I stood tall. "The proof isn't in a bank statement," I said, my gaze steady. "It's upstairs, in your mother's hope chest." Confusion warred with suspicion on his face. He thought I was playing some senile game, hiding the cash again. A flicker of hope returned to his eyes. He thought he'd won. He brushed past me, taking the stairs two at a time. I followed him, my hand gliding along the smooth oak banister. I heard the familiar creak of the third step as he stomped on it, a sound that had marked his growth from a small boy into this angry man. When I reached the bedroom, he was already on his knees, his hands fumbling with the latch on the cedar chest. He threw the heavy lid open with a crash, expecting to see stacks of $100 bills. His shoulders slumped. The chest was empty. Almost. Lying on the bare, fragrant wood at the bottom was a single, thick, blue-bound document. Next to it was Eleanor's small, handwritten note. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. He snatched the document, his fingers rifling through the heavy, legal-grade paper. I stood in the doorway, watching him. "That," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room, "is the Eleanor Vance Artisan Scholarship Trust. It's an irrevocable legal entity. I had it drawn up by the best estate lawyers in the city." He looked up from the pages, his face pale. "Scholarship?" he stammered. "What are you talking about?" I walked over to the chest and looked down at him. "The trust now holds the entirety of your mother's savings. The principal, which is just under $500,000, will be invested. Every year, for perpetuity, the trust will award a full grant of $25,000 to a deserving young student who wants to study traditional woodworking, to learn how to make beautiful things with their hands. Things like this chest." He stared at me, his mind clearly struggling to process the information, the legal jargon, the finality of it all. "Irrevocable?" he choked out. "What does that mean?" "It means it can't be changed," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It can't be challenged. It can't be touched. Not by me, not by you, not by anyone. Ever. The money is protected, Mark. It's doing exactly what it was always meant to do. Building a future." He slumped back on his heels, the document slipping from his grasp and landing on the rug with a soft thud. The fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, gaping emptiness. He looked like a child who had just been told his favorite story was a lie. "You gave it away," he whispered, the words barely audible. "You gave our money, my inheritance, to strangers." I reached into the chest and picked up Eleanor's note. I held it out for him to see, the familiar script a final, silent witness. "It was never your inheritance, Mark. It was her dream. For our next chapter, my love. I read the words aloud, my voice clear and firm. This is her next chapter. This is the legacy. Not a bigger house with a yard. Not a line item in your portfolio. A chance. For generations of young people who have nothing but talent and a dream. That is the value of this money. A lesson you, unfortunately, never learned. He didn't answer. He just knelt there on the floor, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the ghost of his mother's love. A bankrupt man in every sense of the word. He had seen a prize, and in his haste to claim it, he had lost everything. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. After he left, the silence that returned to the house was different. For months it had been a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with grief and unspoken words. Now, it was light. It was clean. It was the sound of a space that had been aired out after a long illness. I walked through the rooms, and for the first time, they didn't feel like a museum of a life that was over. They felt like home again. The sunlight slanting through the living room window didn't just illuminate dust motes. It seemed to warm the very wood of the floorboards. I made myself a cup of coffee, and it tasted rich and bold, not like the ash I'd been drinking for half a year. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been consumed by the dread of Mark's next phone call, the next visit, the next push. Now that low-grade tension was gone, and in its place was a profound, quiet stillness. I went upstairs and opened the cedar hope chest. The scent of wood and history rose to meet me, but it was no longer tinged with anxiety. The blue-bound trust document lay inside, a solid, tangible promise. The chest was no longer a tomb or a treasure chest. It was a cornerstone. It was the foundation of something new, something that would grow and flourish long after I was gone. I ran my hand over the smooth wood, the same wood Eleanor's father had shaped. I had not just protected her money, I had honored the love and hard work that had created it. I had converted her quiet sacrifices into a living, breathing legacy. I closed the lid, not with a sense of finality, but with the peaceful satisfaction of a job well done. Life fell into a new, gentle rhythm. The days were my own again. I spent my mornings in the garden, tending to Eleanor's roses, and my afternoons reading in my leather armchair. The chair no longer felt like a lonely outpost. It was my sanctuary. In early March, about 4 months after the confrontation, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. It was from the foundation administering the trust. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The first Eleanor Vance Artisan Scholarship had been awarded. The recipient was a young woman from rural Pennsylvania named Clara May. She stood beside a half-finished rocking chair, her face beaming, sawdust in her hair. Her letter was written in a careful, steady hand. "I've been working 2 jobs to pay for my classes," she wrote. "I was about to give up. This scholarship isn't just money. It's a second chance. I will honor Mrs. Vance's memory with every piece of wood I shape." I held that letter for a long time, the paper growing warm in my hands. This was it. This was the return on Eleanor's investment. That evening, I sat in my armchair, Clara May's letter on the table beside me. I looked at the photo of Eleanor on the mantelpiece, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The house was quiet, filled only with the steady ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It was a good silence, a peaceful silence. My son had seen a sum of money, a prize to be claimed. He never understood that Eleanor's legacy wasn't an inheritance to be spent, but a seed to be planted. I had planted it for her. And now, somewhere in a dusty workshop, a young woman was building something beautiful, and that seed was beginning to grow. You see, some people look at a life's savings and only see the numbers on a page. My son saw $500,000. He saw a shortcut to a bigger house, a life he felt he was owed. He never saw the thousands of small sacrifices, the patched clothes, the skipped vacations that built that fortune, one quiet dollar at a time. A true inheritance isn't a sum of money you're handed. It's the values you're taught. It's the story of where you come from, the integrity that is woven into your name. In his greed, Mark didn't just try to steal his mother's money. He tried to erase her story. He lost far more than $500,000 that day. He lost his connection to the very foundation he was built on. I didn't do it for revenge, I did it to honor a promise. I learned that in the end, dignity isn't about how much you have, but about what you stand for, especially when you think no one is watching. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that teach us the true price of things. My wife's legacy is now a living thing, helping others build their own dreams. And that is a return on investment you can't measure on any stock ticker. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.